So LethalGamingGear decided to come up with their own mousepads. I was sent the two artisan competitors, the Mercury and the Venus, and also the Jupiter. Their idea is to have high quality surfaces for an affordable price and good availability. Looking at the overall quality, I do have some issues as two of my units did not lay completely flat, but I did manage to fix that on the Mercury. But my Jupiter still does not lay flat after about 5 weeks. This would definitely bother me in game if I did not use a high sensitivity, but with my sensitivity I do not cross these parts of the pad that often. The stitching also has some inconsistencies, but after 5 weeks of use there is no fraying at all and it's very low profile. After Artisan, these pads probably have the best stitching that I have seen and it should not cause you any kind of discomfort. The branding is glued onto the surface and on my Mercury it's actually coming off. It doesn't look good and it does not make it seem like high quality, but for me personally, I do not really care. Other than the Jupiter not laying flat on my desk, the bases are actually really good as they do not move on my desk at all while I game. Overall, considering the sample size that I have here, I have to say that the quality is not comparable to Artisan. But also we have to take into consideration that these cost $30. And for that money the quality is very good if you do not have any issues with the base. Apparently US-based reviewers did not have any issues like these, so this could be something that was caused by overseas transport. Maybe my samples were exposed to heat for a long period of time or something. Moving on to the surfaces themselves, and these can be easily categorized by speed and how rough or textured they are. The smoothest and by far the slowest one is the Jupiter, and then we have the Venus, which is already quite textured and rough, and the Mercury is the fastest and the roughest surface of them all. All of these surfaces are actually very good, but one of these is the least interesting and the most useless for me personally. Let's go through them one by one and start with the Jupiter. If you have heard of these pads before, you've most likely heard that the Jupiter is very slow, but to my surprise the surface is actually very good in certain aspects and cases. It's for sure the slowest control pad that I have tried. For example, the X-ray pad Equate kind of feels like a fast pad compared to this one. The Equate is slightly rough and the Jupiter is very smooth, and that makes the Equate feel faster. The feeling of the pad is very unique and interesting as there is a lot of static and dynamic friction on a smooth surface. The amount of friction you feel is highly dependent on the amount of force you use to press down your mouse to the surface. It also depends on mouse feet size, so smaller feet can feel faster on this surface than larger ones. As an example, the Rocket Cone Pro Air feels slower than the Model O Wireless. Because the mousepad is smooth, even with all this friction I still think that it's good for tracking, but it's definitely the most optimal for TAC FPS games with low GTK, or basically any kind of game where you need that flick style aim. I have played quite a lot of Apex in the past month or two, and I did enjoy using the pad. I think it's very good for those situations where somebody jumps you unexpected on short range, and you need to track the enemy. Those situations are quite hectic and some people do panic and get shaky hands, and that's where the Jupiter shines. The friction will help you keep in control, as with a faster pad you would most likely be all over the place. In CS and Valorant the mousepad felt okay, but I myself do enjoy a faster surface even for TAC FPS these days. Basically my flicks are okay, but I did struggle target switching at times. I would not get this pad if you're using a heavy or a large mouse, but something like the Ultralight 2, which I've unexpectedly fallen in love with, this mousepad can feel quite good with. That and the Pony Symmetrical 2 still felt quite mobile with the pad, but for example the Rocket Cone Pro Air just felt bad. Moving on to Venus, and this is a textured pad where you can feel that roughness and the texture. On your skin this mousepad feels pretty much exactly like the Odin Infinity Hybrid, but with your mouse the glide is different. The Venus feels smoother and it has more control as it has more friction. And depending on your mouse feet, it can have some static friction as well. With smaller feet, it does feel faster and rougher. For example, again with the Model O Wireless, it feels rougher than with the Cone Pro Air. But whatever the case, I actually do love this surface. In my opinion, the Venus is kind of what the Artisan Hayate Otsu version 2 should have been. It is slower than the Otsu version 2, which is fairly smooth but still surprisingly fast. The Venus is very good for those precise and controlled flick shots like you need in CS or Valorant, and it's still very good for tracking that you need in games like Apex or Quake. In terms of rough surfaces, I think it's one of the most balanced and one of the best pads you can get for $30, and it's good for those people who play flick or tracking heavy games, and it's very good for those people who dabble with both. I think this is my favorite mousepad of the massive bunch of Artisan clones that I have. And then the last one is the Mercury, and it's the fastest and the roughest. It's possibly the closest pad that I've tried to the Artisan high-end, but the fact is that it's nearly identical to to about 4 or 3 pads. There are of course some differences with the Akku Control Plus, the Odin Infinity Hybrid and the GameSense Rush and this one, but they are just very close. It's the kind of service where you will feel that feedback through your mouse feet and it feels fairly fast, but not to the extent of LethalGamingGear MPC 450 for example. It's more mouse feet dependent than the Venus, and some mouse feet can feel very rough with this pad, just like with the high-end. After having tested a lot of these high-end clones, if you have that extra money, in my opinion you should go with the high-end. It's the roughest surface and I think it's very well optimized in terms of speed and control. It's also of course more of a premium quality. If you've tried the high-end and it felt too rough for you, I would just go with the Venus myself. For consumers, competition is of course a great thing, but for us reviewers and me specifically, I find it at least very boring to review pretty much the same mousepad for about 4 times. I've got a lot of these rough hybrid pads here, so here's a little comparison so you know which one is the fastest and the roughest. Starting with the Artisan high-end, it's pretty much the fastest and the roughest of the bunch. If you want the best high quality rough surface, the Artisan high-end is the one you want. Then comes the Hayate Otsu in my opinion. It's way smoother than the high-end, but it's still fast. It's very dependent on the feet as well. With some mouse feet, for example with the Jewel's Addice feet, it feels really fast, but with the Prime wireless feet, it's not as fast, but I think it's still the second fastest from the bunch. Then we got the LethalGamingGear Mercury, which actually feels quite a lot like the Hayate Otsu version 2 with the Prime Mini wireless feet, but not so much with the Addice wireless feet, I would say. This is the third fastest. It's quite a bit slower than the Hayate Otsu version 2 in my opinion still, and it feels rougher to the skin, but not nearly as rough as the high-end when you're actually using a mouse. After the Mercury, we have the Odin Infinity Hybrid, and this is very similar to the Mercury. It's a little bit slower, I would say. Then the GameSense Rush is a tiny bit smoother than the Odin Infinity Hybrid. It's a little bit smoother and has a little bit more control. I prefer this one over the Infinity Hybrid. One more good thing about the GameSense Rush is the size. It's 50 x 50 centimeters. Then we have the Akku Control Plus, and this feels a little bit slower than the GameSense Rush, but we have to keep in mind that I've used this Akku Control Plus quite a lot and I haven't used the GameSense Rush at all, for example. So this could have something to do with durability. Then we got the LethalGamingGear Venus, and as I mentioned, it's my favorite hybrid rough surface that's not an Artisan pad. It's got quite a bit more control than the Artisan high-end, for example, and it's got a little bit more control than the Akku Control Plus and the Hayate Otsu version 2. And even the GameSense Rush in my opinion. I mean, it would still be pretty hard to tell the difference in a blind test if I hadn't tried any of these mousepads in months, but I could easily tell it now, I think. You can actually feel some of that roughness through the mouse feet, which you did not really feel with the GameSense Rush. But yeah, the surface is again very balanced, good control, good speed. Then something that's quite a bit smoother than the Venus is the Akku Control Plus ROB. This has quite a lot more control than the Artisan high-end and even more control than the Venus. It's a nice surface if you like something that's quite smooth, has good speed and has stopping power. So overall I do like these pads. I would choose these over any other Artisan competitors myself, but for us Europeans it does seem to be a no-go as they are not available on Max Gaming or on any other European store. And the shipping should be quite expensive, so you should just go with an Odin gaming mousepad or an X-ray pad. There are still things they can improve, and they are also coming up with a new surface, and it's called the Saturn. It's heavily inspired by the Artisan Zero, and it will be more like the Zero than the Odin Eclipse that was just released. That's pretty much it for this one. If you want some more information on what could be the best mousepad for you, check this video right here, and here is my mousepad tier list. Other than that, if you enjoyed the content, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and see you in the next one.